You want to be in an environment that supports your faith. Why make it difficult on yourself, right? If you can make it easier, you should. And he says, what you're doing there is you're creating a catechism for business. And I thought, that's a good name for a book, So great idea. Young people come to me and say, well, which virtue should I be working on most, you know? And the answer...
What if becoming more virtuous could also make you happier and more effective? Dr. Andrew Abela joins 11 Talents to explain how super habits can transform the way we live and lead. Welcome to the 11 Talents podcast.
All right, Dr. Andrew Abela, thank you for joining me for the 11 Talents podcast.
Delighted to be here.
I want to start with your background a little bit because you've given a lot of presentations, and I think one of the first comments people say is like, where are you from? Because they can't quite peg that accent. So tell me a little bit about your upbringing and where you came from.
I was born and raised on the island of Malta.
Malta,
okay. Which for a long time was a British colony. And so we learned to speak British English with a Maltese accent. Maltese is a Semitic language, so it sounds like Arabic. So there's already an interesting... And then when I was 17, my family emigrated to Toronto, Canada. So I went to college there. And that was 40-some years ago.
Wow. So how many languages do you speak?
I get by in English.
Yeah.
And Maltese is a struggle because 40 years, I'll go back, but I can still sort of pick it up,
Yeah.
And I can hack my way through Italian and a bit of French. But language is not my strength. The rest of my family are gifted with languages. My brother, my dad are fluent in like 5 languages each. But no, that was not my strength.
Well, I mean, you're still above the typical American with just two languages. So, but you said 3 or 4, so that's great. So you and your family made it to Toronto, and you went to school. Was that where you did your undergrad in Toronto?
Undergrad, University of Toronto, St. Michael's College, which is the Catholic college within the University of Toronto system. So,
and what was your interest at that point in time?
So I was initially started studying computer science. I was double majoring in computer science and English. And I found that I could do nothing at all and get a B in English, or blow my brains out and get a B+. And I thought there's something wrong with this subject or with me. And so I switched to business. So computer science and business. And
then where did you go on for your MBA?
The Institute for Management Development in Switzerland.
Switzerland, that's right.
Yeah.
Just a little jaunt with the family, or were you married by then?
No, I was single, 25. And in fact, it's a very special memory because despite St. Michael's College being a Catholic college and my high school in Malta was a De La Salle school, I lost my faith in my mid-teens and found it on the first day of my MBA program in Switzerland.
So what was that made you come back to the faith?
The Holy Spirit, but I had been struggling to find out the meaning of life and what are my values, and I would read all these self-help books. I was a real self-help junkie, I was working at Procter & Gamble at that time, straight out of undergrad. And just trying to make sense of life. And I guess I got there, and maybe the stress of being in a brand new program in a foreign country, and I just had this aha moment. It's like, okay, the meaning of life, values, and so on. This is the Catholic faith in which I was brought up. So I went to confession for the first time, started to go to Mass again. Yeah, so that was, and that year was 1991, which is the year that St. John Paul II came out with Centesimus Annus. So my mom sent me a copy of it while I'm in business school. So I'm reading this encyclical while I'm in business school. Quite providential year. So
very much so providential. Tell us a little bit about Centesimus Annus.
So that's the encyclical letter that John Paul II published on the 100th anniversary. So Centesimus Annus, 100th anniversary, 100 years after Rerum Novarum. So Rerum Novarum, Leo XIII, right, the very first of the modern social encyclicals. And John Paul II wanted to celebrate that. And that was just 2 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So that was the big encyclical. So what's so socialism discredited? Is capitalism the way forward? And that was his document. And it was so fascinating to me as in the middle of business school to be reading that. And I began the question for me way back then, what does it mean to be a faithful Catholic in business? So this is a 40-year question that I've been wrestling with. So
as a father now of 5 kids?
6.
So as a father of 6 kids, what lessons have you taught your kids or perhaps steered them to not veer away from the faith like you did?
It's a multitude of things, but I think in general, the reason I fell away from the faith was not so much a failing in my parents, because they're both people of deep faith, but the culture that I was growing up in. And people think of Malta as sort of a religious place. It really wasn't. Even starting from the 70s when I was there, there was maybe a surface level, but
I think they tout like a 95% Catholic population, or perhaps that's changed over recent years, but very culturally Catholic.
Culturally Catholic, exactly. But it was shallow, and there weren't many priests to look up to. There was nothing admirable about the faith that I could see, and our schools, again, the faith didn't really drive much of our education. So we've been really, really careful with our own kids to make sure that they had great Catholic schools to go to and a great Catholic environment or community. So around our parish and our schools, and I think that's made all the difference, because they look around and the people they look up to, the friends they've made and so on, are all living the faith, and that sort of sustains you. It's hard to live the faith alone,
Yes. Well, rising tides lifts all ships, and if you don't have those rising tides,
it's a struggle.
It can happen.
Yeah.
And obviously your parents gave you the strong enough foundation for you to know, where do you go when you're overwhelmed, when you're disoriented, like you were in Switzerland on day one. And I think that's a big question for a lot of parents now. As we've learned, so many kids losing their faith, high school, first years of college. I mean, that's the whole reason Focus was started, right?
Yep.
I mean, to help build that community. So that's a very, the foundation is extremely important for the kids.
Yeah.
So don't lose hope if your kids or grandkids have veered off a little bit.
No, keep praying for them, like Saint Monica did, right? But picking the right grade school, high school, and college is absolutely critical, because it's just heartbreaking to see how many well-formed kids get sent to a state school because it's cheaper, or because it's fun to go to the football games, or to a pseudo-Catholic university, of which there are so many, sadly, where they're Catholic in name only, and then they graduate and they're no longer practicing the faith. It's just heartbreaking.
So then we go from Switzerland, and do you meet Kathleen shortly thereafter?
No, it was a while, actually. After Switzerland, I went into McKinsey & Company. So I worked for McKinsey for 4 years. And always this question of how does one live as a faithful Catholic in business? And then an interesting thing happened. 4 years in, I had my big sort of promotion where I'd be leading a large team, a very big project. And so it's like, okay, this is what I've been building up towards. And they said, okay, here's your team. You're going to be working for a very large bank, and you're going to lay off 10,000 middle managers. That's your job. Okay. Well, I know sometimes layoffs are necessary, but the real cosmic irony was my dad, who had been a senior manager at a bank in Canada, had been laid off just the year before, without really any prospects of ever getting a banking job again in his life. Now, by the grace of God, he ended up, he ran a series of not-for-profits after that, then retired, and has been a painter all his life. And in fact, we celebrate his 90th birthday next month. So it's been glorious. But at the time, it just looked awful. And to think, okay, now I get to do this 10,000 times more, And so I quit. And they're like, what? It was like, yeah, I'm going to go study theology. Maybe I have a calling to be a priest. I didn't know. I was like looking for what God wanted. So I moved to Washington, D.C., to study at the John Paul II Institute for Marriage and Family, because it had been recommended to me, and I knew that they studied the encyclicals of John Paul II, and I thought that's something I should know, And within a couple of weeks of arriving there, I met Kathleen and realized I'm not called to be a priest.
That made that decision quick.
Very quick, yeah.
So you're now the dean of the business school at Catholic University, the Busch School of Business, and you just had graduations, gave out a lot of diplomas. What do you tell students that are going into the McKinsey-type companies, or perhaps McKinsey even public companies, of how to keep their faith? Like, how do they practice it on a daily basis, keep their faith, period?
Yeah, so I actually gave a talk on this at Seek last January, on exactly that question, as to how to keep your faith in the business world. because it's challenging, but so is every other career, whether it be medicine or law or politics. They all have their own challenges, So the first thing I tell them is obviously stay close to the sacraments. If you can get to Mass every day, do, If you can't, as often as you can, but certainly on Sundays, And then confession, people say monthly confession. I say weekly, just because there's so many temptations. And that way, if you miss one or two, you're still going to get there at least once a month, But if you go monthly and you miss one, you miss two.
If you aim for a month, it's going to turn into 2 or 3 months.
Exactly. And there's a lot of sins that can happen in 3 months, So weekly is my goal. And so that's the sacraments is key. The community is key. So finding a group of other like-minded Catholic professionals, like things like Leonine Forum or Young Catholic Professionals and so on. Eventually, of course, legatus, but when they're just first starting out, they're not yet at the level to be.
Yeah. So there's been a resurgence of this, right? I mean, we've seen it in New York City and now in Washington, D.C., where it's gotten some publicity of young people, almost making it popular, like to go to Mass.
To be Catholic.
But it's because of the community, like the gathering before and afterwards.
Exactly.
That's making it, speaking to exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, like St. Joe's in New York City and several places actually in the Washington, D.C. area. Yeah, it's like the raising children. It's like you want to be in an environment that supports your faith, because why make it difficult on yourself, right? If you can make it easier, you should, So with people who will support what you're doing, and you're more likely to find a spouse that way who shares the same faith, which is a really good idea. So those are the first and second thing. And then the third thing I recommend, and the whole Busch School, as you know, is we emphasize this heavily, is strive to grow in the virtues, and no matter what work you're doing, if you're growing in wisdom and courage and self-discipline and so on, the cardinal virtues, justice, then you're becoming a better human being. And even if you end up changing careers or changing jobs or whatever, that growth in virtue is always going to be a benefit. And so when people feel like, well, my job is meaningless, I'm not sure what I'm doing. It's like, fine, you can look around, but if you are growing in virtue, then it's not meaningless. It's totally worthwhile,
So you ended up getting your PhD in business management?
Business ethics. Actually.
Business ethics,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And you went straight from that into Catholic U?
No. I finished my coursework, and then I was recruited to run to be a managing director of a research firm in Washington, D.C. And I had an offer from Catholic University, and I had an offer from this other. The company was called the Corporate Executive Board. It's since been acquired by Gartner. And that company offered me 4 times my Catholic U salary. So I was like, okay. Young family, we had 2 children, a third on the way, It's like, maybe I'll just go make a bit more money before settling for higher ed, So I did that for a couple of years while writing my dissertation. A third child was born. That was a very tough time, Just all I remember is like work, sleep, take care of the kids, sleep.
The number 3 child is a tough one.
It's the one that breaks you, right?
Yeah,
so then God can build you back up again. Yeah. She's wonderful. So I did that for 2 years, and then we decided I would go teach. So that's when I called Catholic U up. I said, okay, I did that other thing. You still have a job for me, I'll come. So I started. That was 2002 now. Yeah. So a while ago. Yeah.
Wow. Do you ever look back and think, you wish you would have stayed in the business world, or do you feel like with what you've developed at a business school, it's helped keep you attached to kind of both have a foot in both spheres?
Definitely kept a foot in both spheres, because I've had a fairly active consulting and training work kind of throughout the years at Catholic. It's the only way I could afford Catholic schools, for my kids, because the professor's salary is mediocre, So we business schools allow, and we do too, a day. You can do a day a week on your own account. So the consulting, training, whatever. I always used to take, as a junior faculty member, I'd take full use of that. And I would typically make way more on a Friday than I did the rest of the week of my professor's salary. So people would say, well, why don't you quit professor and you'd be so much richer? It's like, well, if I wanted to be rich, I would never have come into academia in the first place,
Sure.
So I don't really have any regrets, but there was, when I left executive board, there were a whole bunch of unvested. I mean, I got some stock options, which I cashed in, but there were many others that were unvested because I left, they always try to keep you, I didn't know it at the time, but in hindsight, they were worth a couple of $1 million. So that's, but the thing is, if I had stayed on, I'd be $2 million richer, but I'd have probably stayed on and stayed on and stayed on. Because
when do you stop?
Those golden handcuffs never release. They just get bigger and bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in hindsight, it's very clear that God wanted me to do what I've done. So I've been really, really blessed to have terrific opportunities, terrific colleagues, and start something new to the world, right? Which is a business school that is built from the ground up to be teaching and researching what it means to be a faithful Catholic in business. And that there's nowhere else in the world that does that. So now there are some that are trying, and we help them as much as we can because we think we want lots of business schools to be that way,
Do you see that trend changing with the involvement of Catholic U's business school and then other business programs? I mean, and really this is the question or the answer to Tom's predicament of why he started Legatus. He wanted to ensure that business men and women who were at the top of their companies actually knew their faith and practiced it in Catholic ways, as opposed to saying you're Catholic, but actually not operating that way. I mean, are you seeing that shift at all in the corporate world?
I really am. It started years ago with just sort of noticing that high-performing companies, sustainably high-performing companies, tended to be run by people of faith. It's just an interesting observation, that Pat Lencioni is a good friend of mine. And he's made that observation too. So we've kind of shared that. But now I'm starting to see more and more research, and we're doing research ourselves, and it's becoming clear to me why. So I gave a presentation at the Acton Institute last year where I went over 80 years of management research, and the message is consistent. If you treat people well, if you treat them like human beings, treat them as ends in themselves, not merely as means to profit, you will do better in business, right? It's just time and again, like the research shows this, right? And you think, okay, well, business people are rational creatures. Why don't they all do that? Like the research says, if you treat them well, you'll make more money. So why don't you want to do that? And I think the paradox is you cannot treat people as ends in themselves for the purposes of making more money, because it's a contradiction in terms. Like either you're doing it for, and if you try to treat them as human beings because it'll make you more money, they see right through it. Right? And so it's only a person who is already formed into a character that wants to serve others, right? So serve your own people, that is going to do that naturally. And that tends to be people of faith, right? So I think as this becomes more and more evident, business can become an occasion for evangelization. Because other people look around and go, how come those guys are doing so well? How come those guys are doing so well? Why are they all so happy? Why do they have such low turnover? Why do they, So I'm actually very excited about that and very optimistic.
Well, that's great to hear. In 2014 or so, you wrote a book on the Catechism for Business, speaking directly to this issue.
Yes.
What prompted that, and what has the response been by writing it?
So I wrote it because I was fed up of people saying to me, yes, Catholic social teaching, the church's best kept secret. And so I discovered this when I went to the John Paul II Institute and started reading the social encyclicals. I realized the church has so much to say about business and economics, but it's so well hidden in little pieces of encyclicals, little bits of Vatican II documents, and scattered throughout. It's really hard to find. So I thought, why don't we look for it and kind of gather it all together in one place? And so I started to do that as a project without thinking of it so much as a book. And we had a Legatus event on campus. I don't know if you remember this. So and it was Jim Longan, who was at the time Philadelphia member, right? Now he's at Ave.
He's back in Bucks County.
So at the end of the presentation, Jim stands up and he says, what you're doing there is you're creating a catechism for business. And I thought, that's a good name for a book, so great idea. So then, but it took 7 years to gather all that. Now part-time, but I had a couple of research associates, including one very bright guy who I hired as a freshman. He started working with me at the beginning of the project as a freshman, super guy, Austin Lipari. And Austin graduated from law school the year the book was published. So like, that's how long it took. Like 4 years undergrad, 3 years law school, then he graduates and the book is published. So A Catechism for Business, I didn't strictly speaking write it. I edited it because it's basically a collection of texts from the various. And what we did, Professor Joe Capizzi, Dean Capizzi, is a professor and dean of the School of Theology at Catholic U. We did this together. He provided the theological side, of course I'm doing the business side. And what we did is we gathered all this information, we organized it by questions and grouped it by sort of marketing, finance, accounting, and so on, just questions that business people might have. And then there's no editorial in the sense I'm editor, but I'm not giving my opinions. I'm just saying this is what the church teaches.
Similar layout to the actual catechism.
Yes. Yeah. And important because there's tons of secondary literature on Catholic social teaching, and almost all of it is polarizing. It's either coming sort of from the left or from the right, just trying to twist the social doctrine to say something to support your own pet political theory or economic theory. And I didn't want to do that. I was saying, let's read what the church has to say unfiltered.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about cultured companies. You mentioned Pat Lencioni, who's one of the leading experts on that. What's the company that you or the CEO that you refer to, or maybe you could share a story about that is doing it really well in a bigger company, and what has been the key to their success to getting to that point?
That is a good question. I'm always hesitant to name names.
Okay.
Just because
we can be general.
Yeah, then something goes wrong. And it's like, well, what do you say?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a story of ever since In Search of Excellence, Peters and Waterman in the 80s. Here are the excellent companies, and then a few years later, they're all going bankrupt. Same with Good to Great. Just like it's almost like
we won't pigeonhole them.
Yeah. So that's always the danger. But the kinds of things that I see, and I mean, I can mention some because I mentioned them in my book and in talks and so on. So I just had John Abati, legate from
McDonald's, right?
He owns some 50 McDonald's franchises
on the West Coast.
On the West Coast, and he's the only person I've ever had speak through. We had him back for the third time to speak to our students. He's that good, and John. Just the way, like the love he has for his employees, and his passion for giving them opportunities to grow, he's a case example for what we're talking about. Is when you really care about people, your business flourishes. Another one is in Pittsburgh. I'm not sure if he's a legate. Miles Harrington, company's called Grant Street. They do a lot of consulting work for state and municipal governments.
Okay.
It's been growing for years and years, about 20, 25, 30 years, like nonstop dramatic growth, all organic. And again, same thing. Miles was telling me that after an employee's been there 2 or 3 months, they bring him in for sort of an orientation. It's like, now you've been here 2 or 3 months. We want you to know that what happens at home is much more important than what's going on here. Like, what business would do that?
Wow, yeah.
That's how they live, and it works. Another one would be Trey Traviesa. So Trey's on my board. I know him. He's down in Tampa, I think. But I think you go through. I think for many of the legates, this is how they run their companies. So we've talked about John Hale and corporate travel, right?
Yeah.
Same thing. It's just like love your people. Love your employees first, they'll love your customers. And then, I mean, is it that simple? Life is complicated, but at root, it is that simple. I mean, it's not easy, but that is the essence of it, And so the book I haven't written yet, but I would love to write, would be to name all these names or do it anonymously, but just give lots and lots of examples, because the companies are out there, and they tend not to be the companies that you read about in the Wall Street Journal, because those are the ones that get in trouble.
You can just start being our producer for this podcast and bring on guests, because that's what we're trying to do, is expose those stories of not only them moving from success to significance, but how they lived out that golden rule and those elements that made their company so successful, not just in the worldly sense, but in the eternal sense.
It's a both and it's the significance starts with the success. It's not like either or. You know what I'm saying? It's like the significance is the way you ran your company. That in itself is significant. Another one is Richard Roth, Sea Level Construction down in Louisiana. Same kind of thing. I visited with him and senior managers, and there's just clearly the primary thing for him is taking care of his people, taking care of their customers. There are cases where, one case where a client had a whole bunch of raw materials left over from a job at Sea Level's site and had no knowledge of them. So Sea Level could have just kept all this stuff, It's like, and so his employees came and said, "Well, what do we do?" And I think they knew the answer. And it's like, give them back. It's just
the right thing.
It's just the right thing. It was not even a question, So I think you look throughout Legatus and you find people are all on a journey, but those who get it, that this is kind of what we're talking about, is living the faith. Somehow, somewhere along the way, people might think that there's a compromise or a conflict between living one's faith and being successful in business. Because in the short term, you can always see ways to cheat and get a temporary advantage. But over the long term, there is no conflict. The only way to be long-term sustainable is to be faithful.
So a couple years ago, maybe just last year, you came out with a new book that I think has really inspired and shocked a lot of people. Shocked in a good way, meaning, I didn't realize certain things could be considered virtues. But you came out with a book called Super Habits. What inspired you to write this book on super habits?
What inspired me was, the book came 10 years after the Catechism book. So I write a book every 10 years. Takes that long, So for me, anyway.
Let's hope your next one doesn't take that long, right?
My wife hopes it does. It just complicates life. What I noticed is it's one thing to have the principles of Catholic social teaching, to know them. It's another thing entirely to be in the habit of living them. So that's observation. And then I also noticed growth in interest, particularly among young people, in habits as a way of making life better. So most famously, a book called Atomic Habits, right? Sold millions of copies. People realize that if you want to improve your life, you just have to get rid of bad habits and you have to add good habits. Great. The problem was most of the habits that people focus on and I do this whenever I give a lecture or talk to a group of people. I say, okay, who's tried to develop a habit in the last year or so? And almost everyone's hand goes up. I say, okay, hands up if that habit was a habit of diet, exercise, or sleep. All the hands. That's what people do. It's like, that's typical what you do. Now, in a Catholic group, you might find someone adding a prayer habit, which is very good. And I said, but you're missing, those are all good. It's good to have good habits of diet, exercise, and sleep. But you're missing the most important things, because the most important habits are the virtues, right? The habits, particularly what are typically called the moral virtues, but they're the habits of thinking, acting, feeling, right? So we refer to them classically as prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. But prudence or practical wisdom is the habit of making wise decisions. So it's a habit for excellence in thought, right? Justice is the habit of treating others fairly and with respect for their dignity. And it's the habit of excellence in action, because we're supposed to always act justly, right? And then fortitude and temperance, courage and self-discipline are more modern names, are the habits of proceeding despite being afraid, That's what courage is. It's not a lack of fear, as you know, as a Marine. Fear comes and courage is just walking through that, right? And self-discipline. I don't like the word temperance because it makes most people think just about drinking. But really, temperantia, the Latin, means self-discipline, right? It's the habit of questioning the desires that you have and say, do I want to follow this desire? Does it make sense, So do all the virtues in these super habits come from those cardinal virtues? Almost all of them. There are, of course, the theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, or faith, hope, and love. And then there are intellectual virtues as well. Wisdom, science, understanding, and art could be considered. And where do those come from, those four? So the theological, obviously, from our supernatural aspects, so they're given from God. The intellectual virtues are the virtues for our kind of intellectual life only, in the sense of thought for thought's sake, so that the academic life and so on. But everything else, the kind of virtues that you would exercise in business or in daily life, are all all come from the cardinal virtues. So 4 cardinal virtues, and then another 40 or so kind of subsidiary virtues under each of those. So under courage, you would have things like resilience, perseverance, and so on. Under self-discipline, so I follow Thomas Aquinas on this, and he kind of lays this all out really beautifully. Under self-discipline or temperance, there are 15 different virtues. So virtues like humility and diligence and restraint and so on are all types of self-discipline. And so when some young person particularly is struggling with self-discipline, I said, well, yeah, the problem is you're trying to do the whole thing at once. Don't try to grow in self-discipline as a whole. Just pick one of those smaller ones, work on that. Maybe it's diligence, which is the habit of kind of steering your curiosity into productive directions, I
mean, did you see a lack of these virtues or habits, and that's what spurred you to like really dig into this? I mean, you are a genius, but I'm not the one that's going to be sitting at a kitchen table thinking, what book is not written and that needs to be expounded upon? But you did.
I began to realize at a certain point that almost every single social problem that we face, big and small in our society, can be traced to a lack of virtue somewhere.
Okay.
Whether it's division among people, whether it's lack of productivity, whether it's that if people could grow in virtue, a lot of these problems would be solved. And that it's actually, relatively speaking, fairly simple to grow in virtue because it's just developing a habit. And yet I worried that a lot of people thought about virtues as somehow inherited characteristics. Because people would say things like, well, I'm not very courageous. I'm not very creative. I'm not very organized.
Like it was genetically passed down to them kind of
Which
thing?
it isn't.
Yeah.
It absolutely isn't. We all have our temperaments, and arguably that's genetic. It's fairly fixed, But then our character, which is the sum of all of our virtues, is entirely up to us. Every one of us owns our own character, and we can change it. We can make it better. In fact, we're obliged to make it better. That's what human growth and development is all about. So I just wanted to say, wake up, everyone. You just got to start working on these habits, and life becomes so much better. So then we came up with an app as well, right? So which you're familiar with.
Sends you daily reminders of working on the habits.
Exactly. So for example, for my whole life, I've been improving different areas of the virtue of orderliness because I tend to be a creative type of person, and so I used to think of myself as not very organized until I discovered that there's a virtue called orderliness, which is the habit of doing the right things at the right times in the right places. And you can develop that through practice. And so in particular, I was trying to improve my morning routine because my morning routine was wake up at 6 a.m., check my phone, start doing email. It's not a good way to begin the day, not a happy way to begin the day.
But unfortunately, that's how I think a lot of people
it's common,
start.
Right?
Yeah.
So the app does 3 things. First, it does a diagnostic and tells you which virtues you need to work on. So for me, orderliness was one of them. The second thing is it uses AI. You converse with it to choose a daily practice because this is going to be different for every single person. So I can't have just a menu, just like, so you just, and for me, the daily practice was every morning at 6, I can look at my phone to turn off the alarm, but then I put the phone down and then I want to pray, I want to exercise, I want to shower, and only then can I look at my phone. And so the third thing the app does is it sends you the daily reminder. So every morning at 6:01, there's a little thing saying, practice orderliness, so even if I forget, it's like, oops, okay, got to do that. And actually, it didn't take long. It took about 3 or 4 weeks of that practice. The first day it's hard. You want to go back to the habit.
Yeah.
But then the habit breaks and the new habit steps in, and that's how it goes.
So we've often heard the phrase or the idea that it takes 21 days to build a habit, right? I mean, are you in agreement with that concept?
No.
What's your where do you come out on?
There are numerous studies. Each one of them comes up with a different number, and that shouldn't be surprising because people are different, virtues are different, environments are different. So it depends on what you're doing. But there's a truth to all of the studies that it's a matter of days or weeks, not a matter of months or years. So to say, it's going to take me 6 or 7 years to grow in perseverance. No, you can grow in perseverance in 6 or 7 weeks just by, say, for example, we also put little mini audio courses on the app. So we just put one out, actually just finished one, it should be coming out soon, on perseverance. And one of the best advice for growing in perseverance is whenever you, the reason people don't persevere is not because something is too hard physically most of the time. It's because their judgment is it's not worth the effort anymore. So you're combining how much does it hurt right now with is it worth proceeding? You're a Marine, you know what that was like, right? You ended up doing things that were much tougher than you ever imagined you could, right? And that's because you start to make a different calculus in your head. It's like, I need to carry on, so I'm going to carry on.
You have to continue pushing yourself.
Right, yeah. And so, for example, if you're jogging and you might think, okay, I reached this as far as I can go. And you say, today I'm going to go 4 more minutes. It won't kill me to go 4 more minutes. So you go 4 more minutes. And if you do that every day, you pick extra minute, extra 2, extra 3 on whatever the thing that is difficult for you. And perseverance is typically the things that are physically tiring, physically demanding, mentally demanding in terms of exhaustion, not in terms of anxiety. That's a different virtue. That's resilience, And so, you do that for a matter of weeks and you become a much more persevering person. You've built that virtue. Yeah.
We talked a little bit about Pat Lencioni earlier, and I've always been curious. He's got a few models. Myers-Briggs, not his model, but he endorses it, and then the working genius.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you implement your habits the way that you've laid out and the virtues, can you actually change what kind of working genius? Like, what would your argument be there? Like, can you change that perspective? Or if you are a wonder and an inventor, are you always going to be a wonder and inventor, even though you're intentionally working on habits that might give you more tenacity or galvanization? Or
here's how I think it works. And there's some research that seems to support this. That there's the side of us that's sort of hardwired, right? That doesn't change. And I think that's what the working genius is identifying.
Okay.
So if you are a wonder invention guy, you will be that pretty much for the rest of your life. Similarly with Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs, we know from studies, you can change, but it's over decades.
Okay.
So for example, I remember the first time I did Myers-Briggs, it was in business school. I was 25 years old. And I was exactly in the middle of introvert, extrovert. So I'm sort of 50-50. Apparently I've become more introverted as I've gotten older because I did the thing. I've done it over the years, but I did it again a few weeks ago. So 35 years later, and I'm now 65% introverted. So I moved 15 points in 35 years.
Yeah.
So I mean, it does not
Kids
move.
will do that to you, right?
I want to hide in my office.
Socialization at sporting events and other things, right?
Or the reverse. Yeah, exactly. So if those things change, they change very, very slowly. So that's the hardwiring side. That's the temperament side, right? So that's the working genius. That's the Myers-Briggs. That's the 4 temperaments, the choleric and so on. So that's the stuff that is genetic. Then there's the character side, which are the virtues, and those you change. And so there's that beautiful prayer about God grant me the wisdom to accept the things I cannot change, to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? So the wisdom to know the difference in this case is know what is for yourself and for your employees and your children, know what is part of their temperament, and don't try to force that to change, because that's just who they are. But then know what's part of their character, and there you demand change, because if like when people will talk about you should play to your strengths, hire for your weaknesses, that's true if you're talking about Myers-Briggs or working genius. If you're not a tenacity person, then hire people who are detail oriented to help finish work for you, But on the character side, if you're not very honest, you can't hire people to be honest for you. So that's a character problem that you need to fix, So what happens is the two work together. So you play to your working geniuses, and then you build your character strengths to try to offset the rest. So if you're an introvert, you build the virtue of friendliness, for example, so that you interact better with people, perhaps, But it's important to know what's the hardwiring and what's the part of character that you can then just develop.
Yeah. So you, through this app, have also, I assume, collected a lot of data. Where do you see people going to most? What habits or virtues are people yearning for most that might come as a surprise to you? Or
You would guess most of them. So resilience is the biggest one that we've seen. It is, so that's part of courage. It's one of the virtues of courage. And it's the habit of moving forward despite mental pain. So anxiety, depression, and so on. So many people suffer from anxiety and depression, particularly among young people. And resilience is actually the cure. If you look at, say, cognitive behavioral therapy, right? It's the most advanced treatment for anxiety and depression that we have. It is basically the cultivation of the virtue of resilience. So that's big priority for people. Perseverance, already mentioned, is also a big priority. Various types of self-discipline as well. Diligence, it tends to be very popular as well.
So can you walk me through, like, if I'm an anxious, depressed person, walk me through what it would look like, what your book suggests, and then maybe also talk about the wheel of virtues, because I think that's a pretty unique outlay of how you've displayed them.
Sure. For growing in any of the courage virtues, so any of the virtues for dealing with fears, anxieties, and so on, we follow a lot the work of Dr. Kevin Majors, the golden hour person. I'm familiar with him. Yeah. So he's a psychiatrist at Harvard. And the idea is to reframe the fear. So that so whatever it is you're afraid of, you try to reframe it so that you realize that this is in your head, and that, I mean, there's real parts to fear, like something can actually be dangerous, and that it's not virtuous to go at something if it's not rational, But then a lot of it is just sort of the anxiety comes out of unreasonable fear. So you try to reframe that, and then you practice facing the thing. So somebody who is crippled by depression and anxiety, an act of resilience would be get out of bed and take a shower. Like they want to just stay in bed all day. Say, I'm so terrified. Whatever. No, you just get out of bed, go take a shower, and then go back to bed. Whatever. That's step one. And each time you do that, you strengthen that muscle called resilience, and it makes the fear feel less and less. It's the same thing in psychology. They call it exposure therapy. You expose yourself in little bits to the thing that you're afraid of. So if you're afraid of spiders, they'll show you a picture of a spider, then a picture of a bigger spider, then a little spider in a plastic cage that's dead, then a live spider. And eventually you have tarantulas walking up and down your arms. They're like, I'm not afraid of spiders anymore,
I don't think that'll work with my wife, but
it's probably not a priority.
But it's basically desensitization
to the fear. And that's actually what, so that in effect, that's what the muscle of courage is a sort of a rational stance towards a fear. It's like, okay, this is frightening me, but it's not going to stop me. I'm going to do it anyway, So, and then, and the pain of it lessens because you teach yourself that this thing is not actually going to kill me after all,
So then tell me about the accountability side of things, because, if I'm depressed and in bed all the time, I'm likely not, I don't have a coach or somebody that's obviously encouraging me to get out of bed.
Yeah.
What's the accountability to get them to keep going to day 2 and day 3 to keep kind of extending that exposure?
It really helps if you have someone who loves you and someone you love kind of encouraging you, because then you have somebody else to do it for, The other key thing is, and when most people fail when they're trying to grow in virtue or in any habit really, is trying to take on too much. And then they try it for 2-3 days and they fail and then they give up. So the trick is to find the little bite-sized piece that you can do. And then you do it the next time. The example I give in my book is of a guy who wanted to start working out. And he'd always go get new gear and then go get a gym membership. And after 3 days, give up, So finally he decided to just do 1 push-up every morning. From his knees, I think. It's like, and then that became 2 and 3.
Which is the cheating way, but
but it's a good cheat as much as you want.
Right?
Exactly. The main thing is you start to do something, no matter how small, and you do it every single day. So pick something that is small enough that you can commit to it every single day. And if you miss it a day, try the next day, and you just keep going. And eventually, you're doing a full push-up, then you're doing 10, and then you're doing 100 a day, like Tom does, right? So
At 90 years old,
right? Amazing, yeah.
When I think of super habits, and I've seen several of your presentations, it's more from a business perspective, but this really could be applied at all levels of your, personhood, whether it's with the family, whether it's just the business, personally, professionally, all aspects, right?
Yep, it is, because the virtues. This is how one of the main ways that virtues differ from just your everyday habits is they apply to any aspect of life. So courage that you develop on the football field, you can use giving a speech or doing an interview or facing down an aggressor. They apply across all of life. So in a way, it's why I think that business can be a source of a restoration of virtue, particularly for our young people, because you used to learn about virtue and you used to be given occasions to practice it at home, in church, at school, but that's just not happening very much. And so if businesses see, okay, it's good for us to have our employees grow in virtue, and they give them occasions to do that, and I know of companies who are doing that, then that makes them better, not just better employees, but better fathers, mothers, better citizens, because the virtue is not compartmentalized. It's across your whole life.
So how does somebody take some virtues from super habits, but bring them into their secular company without being criticized for bringing in, like the Catholic brainwashing or whatever, have you renamed the virtues or perhaps, changed how they come across so that people don't, just naturally clam up?
Yeah, well, I wrote the whole book in a secular style, so that anybody could read it. If you're Catholic, you're going to read it and notice immediately the Catholic underpinnings. And I make extensive reference to Thomas Aquinas, but he's a great philosopher, So it is accessible to anybody, and people are using it in companies that aren't explicitly religious, And I mean, the funny thing is, people think of virtue as something religious, but it was the pagans who invented it, so who discovered it. So Aristotle, right, and so it's not something that people need to fear as a religious thing. I mean, I think it's kind of a gateway drug to religion, because you start to grow in virtue and you think, wow, this stuff really works. How come? Did we evolve this way? No, of course not. God made us this way, So it begs the religious questions. But you can certainly start on the path to virtue without religion. Over time, you do need faith to grow. Like, you need the grace of God to really grow in the fullness of virtue. But you can certainly get started and go a long way before you realize that, I think.
You've been teaching at Busch School of Business for what, 23
years?
23 years. What have you noticed in terms of the difference of student 23 years ago to this past freshman class? And then also, how might we help counter that as parents of upcoming, I've got a freshman starting in the fall, How do I make sure that they're set up for success?
They read less and they're more afraid. Yeah, across 23 years, I would see that there is a lack of resilience, which is why I think it's such an important virtue. And there's the video culture has done such a number on our kids that they will watch videos, and so which is less effort than reading, and so their ability to read just fades, and so we try to really promote that. So reading to your kids and giving your kids books and keeping screens away from them at all costs and as long as you possibly can is, I think, really important to prepare them for the rest of life, not just for college. So the good news is I've noticed a positive change in the last couple of years, I think, of classes, particularly this last year, because we had a real dip after the COVID lockdowns. So the kids who went 2 years in their parents' basement, school, remote schooling, really suffered. And we could see that when they came to us as freshmen. But now we're passing that, and we're seeing an improvement in the kids, so which is great. Yeah,
they're kind of out of the system by now, and we've recovered what we lost at that point in time.
At least some of it. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about how most people that lead successful companies are of some kind of faith. And I'm just wondering if you can kind of dig in a little more for us on, how they bring faith, hope, and charity into their business. And really, what does faith play? What kind of role does faith play coming from the super habits in running a business?
Yeah, so faith, hope, and charity, the theological virtues, right? They're the only virtues that we can't acquire ourselves.
These are gifts. Innate from...
They are infused. God gives them to us. Like I can collaborate with the gift of faith, but I can't make myself have faith. You know what I'm saying? That these are purely gifts from God because they transcend our human nature, right? So they enable us to be, particularly love or charity, enables us to be in friendship with God, the infinite, uncreated, as creatures, like as created beings. It's not possible for us to be in friendship with somebody infinite, but for that gift, that virtue. So among business leaders, I think it's a couple of things. One is it gives you the strength day in, day out to love others. You know, even when they annoy you, when they let you down. You know, and so when you have the kind of divine charity in you, you love people because they are children of God, not because they're necessarily very lovable, right? Yeah. So I think that's a big part of it. Another big part of it is the role of grace in the virtues. So the rest of the virtues, but the cardinal virtues, we can grow on our own effort, but there's also supernaturally infused kind of virtue as well. So the gifts of the Holy Spirit, St. Thomas Aquinas lines up the gifts of the Spirit with different virtues. And so there are times when you'll do something and you kind of surprise yourself, like something that's exceptionally courageous or exceptionally wise. And if you're honest, you think, that wasn't me. That was the Holy Spirit, you know? So I think that's, those two things are really at the heart of kind of the role of the faith in running a business, you know. And again, I'm talking about long-term success here, not 5-7 years, you know, which not anybody, but with great strength and sagacity, you can succeed. But to really last kind of decades, in my observation, it usually takes somebody of faith at the helm.
Short-term pain for long-term gain, right?
Yeah, and it is a long-term gain. And, you know, it was talking about faith in the workplace. You know this. My next book is going to be on...
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, because Erin teased it a little bit when I spoke with her. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so Erin Mercino is a lawyer with a great expertise in religious liberty. And we were together in December. You were there at the big multi-chapter Legatus
Northeast Gala
in New York City, which is always a lot of fun. And I gave the after-dinner speech, as you recall, and I mentioned a number of things that religious people might want to do in the workplace, like have a Bible study, or the CEO witness to their faith, or have a corporate chaplain, and so on. And I asked people to quietly keep count of how many of them they thought were legal in a public company. And of course, the surprise was they're all legal. But when I said that, there was this audible gasp in the room. Yeah. People were really surprised. So that evening, Erin and I started talking about it. We said, you know, there needs to be a book on what are you legally allowed to do as a person of faith, as an owner of a company or as an employee. Where are the boundaries, what's allowed? And what's allowed is so much broader than what people realize. So that's what we're working on, and we hope to have it out in time for the summit.
So don't be scared and hide under the bushel basket here.
Exactly.
You can do these things and do it proudly and bring more people to the faith.
And it's your legal right in the United States. Thanks be to God. Yeah.
And I want to mention too, in each copy of your Super Habits book, you have a handout that's the wheel.
Yep.
And just again, tell me a little bit about the wheel.
So I mentioned the book is based on Thomas Aquinas, his treatise on the virtues. And in the treatise, he lays out a beautiful system and shows how all the virtues are connected together in a way that there's no aspect of your life that doesn't have a virtue associated with it. And the medievals would try to draw a diagram of that, and they would call it the tree of virtues. So they'd show a tree, and the big branches were the cardinal virtues, and the smaller branches were the virtues coming off from that. And initially, I started working that way, but then there was another legate, John Busch, who challenged me on that. Yeah, and he said he thought it was boring to use a tree analogy. And I think he was right. And more importantly, the tree analogy gives you the sense that you can always add another branch. So in other words, there's an unlimited number of virtues, which is not true. One of the beauties of the things of what Aquinas did was he showed you that there's a fixed number
Okay.
I think it's 50,
Okay.
you know, which may seem a lot, but across a lifetime, you could master 50 habits, you know. And so what I try to do is put them into a visual representation. And so it's a circle where you start in the middle and you move outwards. And each one of those is a further kind of tighter and tighter distinction until you get all the virtues on the outside wheel. And you use it as a diagnostic tool. And you say, okay, so where do I need to be improving? Oh, yeah, it's this one. It's orderliness. Oh, it's this one. It's honesty, you know. And then you practice and you use the app. So
what single virtue do you think is inhibiting people the most as they go into business?
Well, that's a really good
question.
What
lack of virtue?
What lack of virtue, like what absence of virtue is most inhibiting. If I rephrase that, so young people come to me and say, well, which virtue should I be working on most, you know? And the answer, and it's may seem like an evasion, is it's going to be different for every single person because it's going to be your biggest weakness. But it's a really important question, because this notion of sort of playing to your strengths says you should sort of ignore your weaknesses, you know? And so in the field of positive psychology, they study the virtues and they do a good job. There's a lot of good empirical research on the virtues, but their conclusion is figure out which are your virtues and those are your strengths and play to them. Implicitly, like, don't worry about the other stuff. It's like, no, you need to do the opposite. You need to find your biggest weakness. Your biggest weakness. Is it a lack of perseverance? And oftentimes that's what's going to stop somebody from being a successful entrepreneur. Is it a lack of thrift? You spend money too easily, you know? Whatever the biggest weakness you have, that's the virtue that is stopping you from fulfilling your potential. And once you work on that, everything else starts to rise.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Abela, thank you for sharing your Catechism of Business, your super habits. I look forward to the next book that's coming out on how we can actually practice and live our faith and live those virtues in the business world. Thank you for all you've done for the business community in Legatus.
It's a pleasure to be here.